What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Saturdays and Stores podcast here on the Crossover Media Network. My name is Kanaye Tesoro, and today we got a little bit of a briefer episode. So this past Tuesday, UConn is coming off a 81-47 win over East Texas A&M, bringing them to 4-0 on the season. And as it stands right now, the Huskies rank top 5 on KenPom and are number 2 in the AP poll. So for today's episode, I'm just going to break down a little bit of what head coach Dan Hurley described as a comically bad performance from his team on Tuesday night, and just some of my expectations going to the Maui Invitational tournament, which starts up on Monday. So let's start off with the game on Tuesday. So far, this was probably the game which UConn was able to get out to the best start of the games they played so far. They were able to largely break the trend of them kind of getting off to those slow shooting starts, and they were able to get hot pretty quickly. On the other hand, this was probably the first of the 4 games where their second half was just not up to the standard that the coaching staff and I think most fans would probably hold this team to. Their second half was a lot more sloppier. I believe they had 19 turnovers total in the game, which obviously doesn't help. And, there's definitely some more concerns which have continued to be evident coming in terms of the point guard play on this team. Of course, I touched on that in the first episode last week on just some of the concerns I have about Aidan Mahaney playing the point guard position for this UConn team. Um, you know, I think it's just with not having the size at the guard position, which Hurley has had in past years, and on top of that, having multiple guys who may not necessarily play point guard, but just capable playmakers and capable passers, guys who are comfortable handling the ball in situations. Such as 2 years ago, you on top of Tristan Newton, you had Andre Jackson Jr., who was a probably the best athlete in the country that year. But he's a very capable playmaker. He brought size to. I know he didn't necessarily play guard. He was more of a three, but he was able to bring that dynamic of being able to handle the ball and set guys up to allow them to put them in position to score. Last year, you had, of course, Cam Spencer to go along with Tristan Newton and Stephon Castle, two very capable playmakers with the ball in their hands, both very comfortable handling the ball. And you just kind of don't have that so far with this UConn team. Of course, there's the height limitations that come with having Hassan Diarra and Aidan Mahaney and Solo Ball. And I just don't think Solo Ball is a very, very talented scorer, but I don't think necessarily that playmaking is really in his skill set at this point right now. And just, touching on the things I talked about in the last episode with Aidan Mahaney, he's coming off a season, 2 seasons at St. Mary's where that wasn't his role. He was on the floor largely as a combo guard, just out there to score for the most part, largely playing the two and not really being in a position where he had to play the one like he has had to this year in the 4 games so far starting. Um, and, I love Hassan Diarra. All Husky fans love Hassan Diarra. We know what he brings defensively and the toughness he brings and that New York guard mentality. And it's great. It's been amazing the last 2 years for this UConn program. It just, if we're being honest, he's no Andre Jackson Jr. nor Stephon Castle. There's a height limitation there. And I just don't think he's as talented of a playmaker with the ball in his hands as those 2 guys I just mentioned. But I think up to this point, Aidan Mahaney hasn't necessarily played as well as I think many people have hoped he was going to. And while I do understand that, I don't think it's necessarily fair to judge him at this stage, this early in the season. It's a lot to have to come into a UConn Dan Hurley system and be able to pick all these things up right away. It's extremely hard for freshmen. Stephon Castle struggled at the beginning of last year, and Liam McNeely's handled it pretty well up to this point, and he looks like he's going to be a really, really big contributor for this team, and everything we've seen from McNeely's been really promising. But again, it's tough for transfers. Again, Tristan Newton, his first year with UConn in that program, in that Dan Hurley offense, he probably didn't fully grasp what it meant to be a UConn guard, or I should say UConn point guard, largely until February, heading in, and early March, heading into the tournament last year, where he ultimately became the Tristan Newton we all knew and love. And I just think, it's tough for first year transfers and freshmen to come in and have to pick all these sets in offense and the offense up so quickly and expect them to be able to put out a crisp product on the court. I just don't think that's a realistic expectation to have. And I don't think it's fair for people to judge Mahaney off what he's shown so far. And I do think he gets to that point at some point this season. But I think you'd like it to be sooner than later, but I think he will get there at some point. And there's just going to be some growing pains with this team. It's not normal to lose what UConn lost 2 years ago in Adama Sanogo, Andre Jackson Jr., and Jordan Hawkins, and just be able to have the turnaround they had last year and be as dominant as they were and blow through the tournament and win a national championship. And I think UConn fans and just college basketball watchers across the country need to realize that this is normal, what we've seen so far this season, some of the growing pains with this roster. This is what should be expected in today's current state of the game with the transfer portal and NIL to not necessarily be amazing right off rip the way they were last year. And even last year, there was, a little bit of a growing pain and with, guys trying to figure out their role and how they were going to impact the team last year. And of course, they had the injuries with Klingon, with the ankle, and Cam was hurt a little bit and played hurt at the beginning. And, Stefan, he had some injuries too. But I think, this year, I mean, I think Rob Doster from the Field 60 had a great take on this where he was saying, take away the two national championships, pretend this was the 2021, or my mistake, the 2022 season where they hadn't won anything. Say you take this current UConn roster and move it back 2 years where no national championships have been won and UConn's not this wagon of a program that they currently are. I think a lot of people would be very optimistic about the showings we've seen and the potential for growth that this current UConn team has. I mean, again, I know the competition they played has been great so far, and we're about to get a real proper read on just exactly what this UConn team has a chance to be coming up in the Maui Invitational, where they do play a Memphis team, which I think they should beat, just because I think the talent UConn has should be enough to win fairly comfortably against the Memphis program that's, experiencing a lot of turmoil with Penny Hardaway on the hot seat. And assuming they win that game, they would play the winner of Michigan State and Colorado, which, two programs which haven't been very great up to this point so far in the season. I know that's a game I think they also should win. Of course, you never know what happens until it actually does. But I'd like to say that they beat Memphis and they probably do beat the winner of the Colorado and Michigan State game, which would put them in the Maui Championship facing either North Carolina, Iowa State, or Auburn. Three teams which all have a chance to make a Final Four and win a national championship, especially Auburn and Iowa State, who, I mean, Auburn has, you can make an argument Auburn has looked like the best team in the country up to this point so far in the season. Just with Janai Broom, a first-team All-American candidate, and the contributions they've got from guys like Todd Pettiford, the really talented freshman who shot the lights out against Houston, really put himself on the map there in that game. And, of course, Iowa State, what they bring with Milicic and Tom and Lipsy, that backcourt's really, really good. And I think defensively, you know what they're going to bring. And I think it'll be playing any three of those teams is going to be a really, really good challenge to see where this UConn team might stack up against some of the competition across the nation this year in college basketball. But again, going back to what I was saying, I think there's so much room for growth on this UConn team this year where we haven't seen Aidan Mahaney at his best yet. We haven't seen, Samson Johnson. He's, tends to foul a lot. He really has a fouling problem, but, I think he's able to get to a point this year where he becomes a little bit more disciplined. And I mean, there was the concerns with Terrace Reed coming into the season, being the transfer from Michigan, about his ability to not turn the ball over and being able to process the game. Where, those are some concerns people had about him coming out of Michigan, where, he turned the ball over a good amount last year. And he's a little bit slower when processing what's going on in the game. Um, and there are times where that might have seemed a little. He might have seemed to have a little bit of trouble processing when to make the right passes. But I mean, up to this point, coming off the bench for Samson Johnson, he's been great. I believe he's had double-digit rebounds in every game this year, and he's been a pretty good scorer. Being able to pick up and ones and you know getting offensive rebounds and being able to crash the glass and being able to get those shots. And I think seeing that is really makes me optimistic about what he might be able to bring to this team this season. I think the coaching staff would ideally like, at some point in the season, once Terrace Reed is able to get there fundamentally and his processing of the game is up to par with what the coaching staff wants, I think they would like for him to make it to a point where they kind of are forced to start him over Samson Johnson. I understand that's going to be a really difficult conversation to have with Samson, being that he's been with this program for 4 years now. He's waited his turn behind Adama Sanogo and last year with Donovan Clingan. And I mean, he's done well, really, as a change of pace center who's able to rim run and really get out in transition and block shots. Again, you see the thunderous dunks he has all the time. And I think Hurley talked about this in an interview a few days ago, where I think it's kind of got into Samson's head a little bit, where the guards haven't done the best job in being able to find him in his spots for him to get those easy dunks or those nice alley-oops that Newton, Cam, and Steph were able to throw him last year to really amp him up and get him in the zone. And I think that kind of leads to him kind of hacking, just being a little antsy, not being able to get those easy points the way he was able to last year, with the guards not being able to get him necessarily in the positions to be able to do that. So I think overall, what we've seen from this team so far, of course, there are concerns, but I think there's a lot of room for growth with this team, which makes me really, really excited for seeing what this team is once they get into conference play and once we get into late February and March going into the tournament. I think with Aidan Mahaney, it's just going to be a matter of him understanding what it takes to play the point at UConn. It's a lot to have to pick up that quickly in off season. I understand they've been going at it for a long time. The Dan Hurley practices are very tough. That coaching staff pushes their guys to the limit every day, and I think it's pretty clear that a lot of these guys on the team are kind of tired. I don't know if tired is the right word, but they're antsy to play real competition. I think it's tough to get up for some of these games against teams that are outside the 300s and Ken Palm, and don't necessarily bring the level of competition that I think a lot of these players want to play. And I just think in games where the talent that this UConn roster has is a little bit overwhelming for these mid-major schools, I just think they want to play competition. And I think the Maui coming up is going to be really, really big, because I think they're going to be able to showcase what they can do against actual high major talent. And I'm really, really excited to see what they're able to put out on the court. I think you're going to need to look for Aidan Mahaney to try to calm down a little bit in terms of him needing to really just play the game to his pace. I think a lot of time he's kind of out there in that same mentality he had at St. Mary's, where he's looking to score and it's not there, and he kind of maybe just I don't want to say freak out, because that's not what it is, but he just kind of he's just not in fully locked into the game where he needs to be in terms of being a playmaker and looking for guys, getting them into the right position. He did make some good passes in the game on Tuesday, and he was able to knock down a few threes. I think he ultimately went 2 for 7 from three, because he missed a lot of open he missed a fair amount of open threes in that game, and I just think it's kind of getting to his head a little bit. In that New Hampshire game, or yeah, and then game against Lemoyne, my mistake. He had a lot of shots that looked really good and kind of went in and out the rim. And I think, that's kind of getting to his head a little bit. And he's maybe not getting the shots that he got last year, St. Mary's, because that's just not his role this year. And he's not being necessarily put in the position to get some of those shots he's accustomed to getting, like he did at St. Mary's, because he is on the ball this year. He's playing the point, which he hasn't necessarily done up to this point in his collegiate career. And I think once he's able to calm down a little bit and understand his role, where he's there to get guys in the right position and then be that guy, kind of like a Tristan Newton, where if nothing's going on, you can throw it to him with, say, 7-8 seconds left on the clock. He can go out and get his own shot. And I mean, I think once he's able to realize that he needs to be the offensive hub on this team and move the ball around and run the sets through him so he can get his teammates in the right positions to get their shots. I think that's just going to open up the game for him. It's going to add to his confidence, and I think he's going to be able to then play off that and put himself in positions to get those shots he wants. And I think once he's able to do that, it's going to take this team to a new level. On top of that, I think the emergence of Jaden Ross is a really big contributor for this team. Has been huge. He's not someone who I initially thought was going to perhaps play as big of a role on this team as I maybe would have expected going into this year. But I mean, you saw what he brought in the game against New Hampshire, scoring 14 points, and the shooting abilities there. You see how he can attack the basket. He had some really tough layups in some of the games against New Hampshire and Lemoyne. And of course, you saw on Tuesday that poster dunk he threw down. I think it was SportsCenter top 10 the next day, which is pretty cool to see. But I mean, he's really proven himself as I think he's really proven that he has a chance to be a legit NBA prospect, and I think that's just going to motivate him even more because he had to sit last year. It was really the only guys from that freshman class last year outside of Steph that were really getting any minutes, which the minutes were still limited, were solo ball when Steph went down early in the season, and then Jalen Stewart as the season went on. And I just think with such a loaded backcourt, which they had last year, was tough for guys like Jay Ross and Solo to get those opportunities to come in and contribute. And I think this year with Solo starting, I mean, we've already seen what he's able to do shooting the ball. And, he's been fairly decent as a playmaker, which is definitely encouraging to see in terms of in terms of the dynamic he can bring playing the two as an off guard. And then, of course, Jaden Ross, just the improvements from last year to this year that the coaching staff has seen, which is put him in a position where they feel like he can come in and be a big contributor. And then I just think Jalen Stewart, I mean, if he can come in for say Alex Caravan or Lee McNeely and contribute, knock down those shots. We all know he's fully capable of hitting and being a guy who can get on the glass and get out in transition and run. I think that's going to be really, really big for this team. And then I mean, just what we've seen from Lee McNeely. I mean, he looks mature beyond what you'd expect a freshman to be. I'd almost say I don't know. I don't want to be a homer on this, but I feel like from the 5-star freshman I've seen play this year, outside of maybe Derek Queen, Lee McNeely's maybe been the most composed freshman I've seen up to this point. I mean, Cooper Flagg's been amazing too, but I think you kind of look at the two turnovers late against Kentucky. Those are pretty evident freshman mistakes. I think in the scrimmage against URI, Lee McNeely came out a little too hyped up and a little too antsy, forced some shots in that game. But in the actual games they played this season, which count, he's played really, really well and calm. And I think when the shot's not falling, he was able to go to the basket and get a layup, get an and one here and there. Like we saw on Tuesday night, I believe he had one or two. And I think, that's him being able to do that is really, really good. And I think he definitely has a chance to kind of take on that Cam Spencer type of role for this UConn team this year. And then with Alex Caravan, I mean, he's looked great up to this point. I believe it's been a few days since Tuesday night, but I think going into Tuesday night, he led the country in blocks per game. I think he was at around 4. Think he only had 1 or 2 Tuesday night, so those numbers obviously would probably going to go down. And I mean, I just think the defense, the improvement of his defensive game has been huge, and also his ability to hit shots off the dribble and being able to be a better movement shooter is just those improvements in this game have been huge for this team. And I'm really really excited to see what this team is going to be able to do in the Maui Invitational. Again, I think talent wise, this UConn team probably overwhelms that Memphis program. I just think even if they don't play their A game, which you hope they do, just to get them ready to play some better competition coming up in the later games of the Maui. Um, I think even if they don't play their A game, they should still be able to beat Memphis fairly comfortably. And then again, uh, Colorado, Michigan State, you haven't seen too many great things out of those programs yet this year. I think Jaden Atkins, what he's going to be able to bring for Michigan State is going to be something to watch in that game. But overall, I think they probably do beat the winner of Colorado and Michigan State. And then to match up against more than likely either UNC not Dayton. I don't think Dayton beats North Carolina in that first round game, but more than likely North Carolina, Auburn, or Iowa State. I think that championship matchup is going to be really, really good. Really, really good, assuming UConn's able to get there, which I believe they should. And it would be, I think to most people, including me, pretty shocking if they don't. So overall, I think this is going to cover everything for this episode today. If you like what you see here and on our other college basketball content on this channel, please make sure to rate, subscribe, tell your friends about it. All helps with getting this content out to more people and helping with the algorithm on YouTube. So that is all for today. Hope you guys enjoy watching the Maui Invitational coming up this week. And until then, I'll see you all next time.